Welcome to the Buckeyeballlecry show, where I discuss college football games and topics. Today's topics: Week 11 highlights, the Buckeyes versus Purdue, my top 5 games of last week reviewed, my top 10 rankings compared to the AP, this week's Legends in Scarlet and Gray, and my preview of Week 12's top 5 games and picks. I'll just start off the show with, of course, the game we care about most is the Ohio State game. It was Ohio State at Purdue. Buckeyes were 28.5-point favorites going into the game. And of course, Ohio State won the game 34-10. But my assessment of the game is the Buckeyes have a ho-hum game against Purdue without Tate in the lineup. You could tell this game was like a scrimmage to the Buckeyes. Nobody was really fired up on either side of the ball, and it showed early. The best run of the year was nullified by Jeremiahsmith's block in the back. The defense let Purdue march right down the field and held them to a field goal. Then the Buckeyes started to play with a little more precision, not necessarily with the fire and intensity you might have seen in, say, the Penn State versus Indiana game. But then again, who can blame them? This is why it's so hard to go undefeated in a season, because these guys are human. It's not easy to get fired up when you are undefeated and you're going in to play a 2-7 football team. The only way to really do this is if you give yourself goals that are difficult to accomplish or reach. If you're on defense, you would want to have a goal like shut Purdue out, not let them score at all. That's one good way to get your defense fired up, to play a little harder. If you're on offense, you would have to have a goal like score every time you touch the ball. The mentality that, punting the ball against a 2-7 team is not acceptable. Those kinds of things help you push through when you're playing lesser teams. I don't know if the Buckeyes do that or not. I'm talking strictly from a former athlete's perspective. Even Sayin was a little less sharp in this game than he has been all season. 27 of 33 is still very good, but he had 5 incompletions, and he hasn't done that since his 7 incompletions in his first career game against Texas. It's a high bar. It's a high standard for sure, but he just wasn't as sharp as he has been in previous weeks. I did like seeing the other receivers out there getting the ball. It was Ennis getting more catches. He's a team captain, and as most everyone knows, he is playing with the best wide receiver duo in college. So when one is out, he needs to be the next man up. In this game, it seemed to be tight end Max Clare, but that could have also been because the Buckeyes were playing Claire's old team, Purdue, that he transferred from. Jeremiahsmith had another 100-yard receiving game with 10 catches on 10 targets. So every time he was targeted, he caught the ball, and 137 yards and a touchdown. Sayin passed for 303 yards with a touchdown and an interception, a pretty bad interception. He threw the ball across his body in the end zone. The defensive end had dropped off the line, and he picked it off. That will be a learning lesson for sure this week in preparation for the UCLA game for Sayin. That's what is crazy about Sayin being what I believe is the best quarterback in college football as a redshirt freshman, and he still has so much room to grow and learn. He is already ahead of the curve, which reminds me, just because he goes out and carves out a defense and the Buckeyes win decisively every week doesn't mean a QB who is not having a great game but has a drive at the end of the game that pulls out a win is better. Yes, I'm talking about Mendoza in Indiana. Mendoza went 19 for 30 for 218 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 interception against the team. Sayin just went 20 for 23 for 316 yards and 4 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. And people think Mendoza deserves the Heisman for one last game winning drive. It's absolutely ludicrous. And anyone who is taking taking this stance has a low football IQ, and you should be understanding their football knowledge and understanding is questionable at best. Now, on to the defense. Even with the second string playing the last defensive series of the game, in total, the defense only gave up 94 passing yards and 92 rushing yards. Buckeyes end up winning by 24, which is why you don't bet on point spread. They had the point spread covered, and rightfully, they wanted to give backups playing time with a 31-point lead in the fourth quarter. And Purdue drives down the field. They score a garbage touchdown at the end of the game, which means absolutely nothing, except if you bet on the Buckeyes and you took the points, and then you lost your money. So this is so unpredictable, and it's a fool's game to play. So Buckeyes win easily and in control, and next week they move on to UCLA in the horseshoe with the same issue, and that is, how do you get them fired up for a 3-6 football team? More on that game later in the show. The next game I'm going to cover is Oregon at Iowa. Oregon was favored by 6.5, which of course I thought was too much. Why? Because I picked Iowa to win this game. I thought Iowa would win this game outright in Iowa, but they didn't do it. So a little bit about the game if you didn't watch the game. This game had a very exciting finish. The first 3.5 quarters were not great to watch. That is what you expect when you play Iowa, especially in Iowa. They win ugly with strong defense and usually very good to great special teams. But against Oregon, the special teams play let them down at times, and because of the terribly rainy, cold weather. The reason I had picked Iowa to win this game is because Oregon's strength all season had been running the ball, and Iowa has a very good run defense typically, and I thought they would key against Oregon's running game and make Oregon beat them by passing the ball. Iowa did not do that. Oregon ran for 261 yards in this game, and Iowa still had a long final drive to go down and take a 1-point lead after scoring on a 4th and goal. And Oregon was able to come back out and make some incredible passing plays and get in position to kick the game-winning field goal. They, of course, made it and won the game, as I already told you, but Iowa had a chance to win this game, and Oregon just made the plays when it mattered the most. Oregon only had 112 passing yards the entire game, with the bulk of them coming on that final drive. I just want to add that everyone assumed that the ugly, nasty weather was going to work against Oregon and in the favor of Iowa. I genuinely believe it worked against Iowa. They had 2 turnovers and they couldn't get their footing on defense, and it just seemed like Oregon handled the weather better than Iowa did. So it looks like the Ducks are in a solid position to make the playoffs, but definitely not a lock. They have Minnesota, USC, and at Washington remaining, and that Washington team is a Jekyll and Hyde team. We'll discuss a little bit more about that later. Next game is Texas A&M at Missouri. A&M wins 38-17. I picked A&M to win. It was almost a no-brainer, really. A&M is showing up to be the most complete and best team in the SEC so far this season, as we're coming towards the end. And this game was not even close, really. Texas A&M thoroughly dominated it in just about every category. Everyone knows Missouri relies heavily to exclusively on their running game and great defense to win games. Their running game nor their defense could get it done against A&M. Missouri also turned the ball over twice, and A&M had 464 yards of total offense, while Missouri had 77 passing yards. Their QB Zollers went 7 of 22, which is a 31.8% completion rate. Like, That's not even good for high school. Most likely with that solid win against an overrated and bad Missouri team, I believe A&M will go to number 2 in the college football playoff committee poll, and Indiana will drop to number 3 after a close last-minute win at Penn State. We'll see what happens. Next game is LSU at Alabama. Alabama wins it 20-9. They were favored by 11.5 points. They won by 11, so didn't cover the spread if that's something you care about. I picked Alabama to win this game. This game was a lot like the Iowa-Oregon game to watch. A lot of smash mouth, ugly football. LSU has a terrible offensive line and had struggled to score points all season. And frankly, I thought Bama would beat them much more decisively. But Ty Simpson wasn't that sharp at times. He was 21 of 35 with a 60% completion rate for 277 yards. And at times, he just made bad passes. He missed open receivers, and there were plays there to be made, and he just didn't get it done. He missed them. He overthrew them. He's still one of the better quarterbacks in college football, but he is not Juliansayin. He is not on Sayin's level, and people are going to say, well, you're a Buckeye fan. Of course, you're going to say Sayin is the best quarterback. While it's true I am a Buckeye fan, I am also hard on my team. If I watched a better quarterback play on Saturday than Sayin, then I would be the first here to say this guy's better. And that just isn't the case. Almost all of Sayin's incompletions come from defensive pressure and him throwing the ball away. Not all of them, but most of them. And I saw Simpson do that not only last Saturday, but in previous Saturdays as well, where he just missed open receivers or wasn't precise with his passes. Anyway, Sayin is better than Simpson is the point I'm trying to make. And he's better than Mendoza, and he should be the front runner for the Heisman. But back to this game, Alabama only ran the ball for 56 yards on 24 attempts, which is barely 2 yards per carry. This was not an impressive performance by Alabama at all. If they play against this like A&M in the SEC championship game, Bama will lose, and probably decisively, to A&M. So like I said, I did pick Bama to win this game, and that would make me 3-1 at this point in my picks. All right, next game is BYU at Texas Tech. Texas Tech won this game. I picked Texas Tech to win this game. They were favored by 9.5. They won by 22. I thought they would beat BYU pretty easily, especially at home. And this game was not particularly close at all the entire game either. BYU struggled to even move the ball at all against Texas Tech. They had 3 turnovers, which, as you know, are game-losing killers unless you can force some turnovers yourself, and BYU was unable to force any turnovers from Texas Tech. There's not a lot to say about this game except Texas Tech clearly looks like the best team in the Big 12, and that loss to ASU was one of those anomaly games that you just have to give ASU credit for being the better team on that day. The next game that I discussed last week and predicted was Navy at Notre Dame. Navy was 7-1. Notre Dame was 6-2. Notre Dame was a 24.5 point favorite, and they won the game by 39. 49-10 was the final score. I mean, what can you say about this game that would be interesting or exciting to talk about? Nothing really, unless you're a Notre Dame fan. That's all I can think of. It was a well-balanced game by Notre Dame. They had 253 yards passing and 249 yards rushing. The only interesting stat, at least in my eyes, is not a running back or a receiver had 100 yards in the game. 7 different players caught a pass, and 5 different players ran the ball, with Love and Price getting the bulk of the carries at 13 and 10, respectively. Love averaged 7.2 yards per carry, which is a bit misleading because he had a long run when Navy thought he was down, and he wasn't. Otherwise, Notre Dame looks like a potential and worthy playoff team. They are at Pitt next week, so it's really their only remaining challenge of the season, with Syracuse and Stanford to finish the season. Like I said, I also had picked Notre Dame to win this game, and I went 5-1 for my picks last week. Some other notable games worth discussing or talking about are Indiana's win against Penn State in the last minute. I bring this up because it keeps Indiana undefeated and most likely in the top 3 by the committee. For as much as I give refs a hard time, I have to give the ref credit for calling the catch that the Indiana's receiver made in the end zone at the end of the game a touchdown. Like, that was a great call because it was a bang bang play and he called it a touchdown live, and even in slow motion it was tough to tell that he caught that for a touchdown. I have to chalk one up to the refs for making a solid call. I always give them a hard time, so this time I wanted to give the refs some kudos for calling that right on the field live during the play. Other games worth mentioning: Ole Miss beat the mighty Citadel in a tough rival game. Just kidding. Just wanted to give Ole Miss crap for playing Citadel towards the end of the season. It's a joke. Miami beat Syracuse to stay in the hunt for the playoffs. Vanderbilt took overtime to beat Auburn, and they stay in the playoff hunt. Wisconsin beat Washington in a shocking upset to knock Washington out of the playoff hunt. Cal beat Louisville to drop them to 7-2 and put their playoff dreams at risk, with Clemson, SMU, and Kentucky remaining on Louisville's schedule. I don't see Louisville getting through those 3 games without at least one loss, but they could possibly lose all 3 of those games. Also, Wake Forest beat Virginia. Previously, the ACC's highest rated team, Virginia was, followed by Louisville. So the ACC is in trouble and are looking like potentially one automatic bid qualifier could be the only team representing the ACC by the way the committee sees them in their rankings. Kentucky absolutely destroyed Florida 38-7. You might ask, why do I bring that up? Well, remember last week when Georgia barely beat Florida? And I talked about this is a sign that Georgia is just not that good. All I heard from the SEC pundits were talking about how Florida would wreck in the Big Ten, which of course is a joke. And then Kentucky absolutely destroyed them, which shows you what? Florida is very bad, and they are what their record says they are. And if they were in the Big Ten, they might be 2-7 or 1-8. And Georgia is still not good. That Mississippi State team Georgia just handled, yeah, Florida beat them. So I don't want to hear about it as a value in that win that Georgia beat Mississippi State, because they lost to Florida and Florida is awful and Georgia barely beat Florida. And finally, USC beat Northwestern on Friday night, which still has them in the playoff hunt as well. Now let's take a look at the current Big Ten standings. Indiana and Ohio State are still on pace to meet in the Big Ten championship game, with Oregon, USC, and that one team still mathematically in the hunt. As I stated before, they will be eliminated on November 29th, so no need really to discuss their chance. We can discuss Oregon and USC, however. USC has Iowa at home, at Oregon, and UCLA at home. It's this reason that I'm doubting their chances to make the playoffs. They would have to win a tough one this weekend against Iowa and then go to Oregon and play probably their best game of the year to get out of there with a win, and then not have a letdown against their crosstown rival UCLA. So it's a tough final stretch for USC, but if they do go through that undefeated, they definitely deserve a spot in the playoffs. Oregon has Minnesota this week. They have USC at home, as I mentioned, and then at Washington, which, as we know, Washington is capable of beating Oregon at home. They are such a Jekyll and Hyde team. Washington is not good on the road, and they are a completely different team at home. It's got to be one of the biggest home away challenges for a team I can think of in college football. All right, let's take a look at the current SEC standings. Texas A&M sits atop the SEC, followed by Bama with the head-to-head win over Georgia. Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas, Vanderbilt, and Oklahoma are still in the hunt. Now, for me, Oklahoma is likely to be knocked out by Bama on November 15th. Texas has 2 chances to get knocked out, first by Georgia, then by Texas A&M at the end of the season. So I don't feel good about their odds of making the playoffs either. Ole Miss is going to cruise into the playoffs with Florida and Mississippi State left on their schedule. And even if they lost one of those, they would still be in. Vanderbilt needs to win out against Auburn, Kentucky, and Tennessee. And honestly, I don't think they can do it. So right now, I see 4 SEC teams going to the playoffs, and that's the top 4 you see in the graphic: Texas A&M, Alabama, Georgia, and Ole Miss. Let's take a look at the current ACC standings. Georgia Tech, Virginia, SMU, Pittsburgh, and Duke left in the race to make the ACC championship game. So the ACC is very wide open, frankly. I have a hard time seeing anyone not named Miami making the playoffs if they don't win the ACC Conference Championship, and that's if Miami wins out. That is not a given that the final game of the season at Pitt is going to happen for Miami, but if they do win out and they do beat Pitt and they don't make it to the ACC championship game, a 2-loss Miami I see getting into the playoffs because of their resume. They did beat Notre Dame, remember, who's going to most likely be a playoff team. So we'll see how the ACC plays out, but if you're an ACC fan, you better hope your team wins the conference. And finally, let's look at the current Big 12 standings. The Big 12 has 5 teams left essentially in the race to win the conference and a playoff shot. Now, Texas Tech has UCF and West Virginia, and I see them winning out. BYU has TCU at Cincinnati and UCF. Cincinnati has Arizona, BYU, and TCU. Houston has UCF, TCU, and Baylor. Very winnable games for Houston to finish the season with 2 losses. So that would be interesting to me to see what the committee would do if that would happen. Utah has at Baylor, home against K-State, which I think is very significant because if they went to K-State, K-State could have a very good chance of winning that game. But at home, I like Utah, and then at Kansas. So of these remaining teams, I like Texas Tech as the only lock to get into the playoffs. I'm not sure if a 2-loss team from the Big 12 makes it into the playoffs unless they make it to the championship game and a 3rd loss. They take a 3rd loss and then they make it in. I think a 3-loss team only makes it in if they're not an automatic qualifier with a conference championship game lost. That to me would be the only exception. So if we get that scenario, I'll discuss it in a future episode. But, basically if you have a 11-1 Texas Tech team playing a, let's say 10-2 BYU team, and then BYU loses that conference championship game, which would make them have a 3rd loss, I could see why the committee would let them in because that's an extra game they played and an extra loss. But like I said, I'll cover that more again in the future. So since I record these on Sunday, let's look at last week's AP Top 25 versus the College Football Playoff Committee's first poll. Now, generally, the College Football Playoff ranking is more respected, and it's certainly the one that matters the most by the end of the season and decides who makes it into the playoffs and who is out. There's not a huge discernible difference in the top 12, except for the fact it is clear the committee does not value the ACC at all. You could see that AP had Virginia at 12 and the committee had Virginia at 14, I believe, going into last week. And now Virginia lost and Louisville lost, who was right behind them. So it will be interesting to see what happens next week. I also think it's ironic that they have Alabama at number 4, and Alabama's only loss is to what was at the time a 4-4 ACC team in Florida State, who is now 4-5 after their loss to Clemson last week. So otherwise, there's not a huge disparity between the two rankings. And unfortunately, these rankings don't come out until Tuesday night. And like I said, I record my show on Sundays, so I can't go over these rankings until the next week. Now, if I can get enough followers and get monetized and keep getting views, then maybe I could start doing a couple shows a week. If you like the show and you're a Buckeye fan, get out there and let other Buckeye fans know about this show. It would be a dream come true for me to cover Buckeye and college football for a living. And I'm 52, so I'm not getting any younger. So help me out. Help me get some more subscribers and viewers of the show, and maybe I can do a couple of these a week. All right, enough on that. Let's look at the AP top 25 for week 12. So who is ranked too high? Again, as you guys know how I feel, I've made it clear week after week. Georgia is ranked too high. And of course, Tennessee with 3 losses has no business in the top 25. I'm not arguing that Tennessee isn't potentially a good team, especially offensively, because they do have one of the best offenses in the country, but they've lost 3 games. So they don't belong in the top 25. I'm genuinely surprised that Indiana didn't drop to number 3. I will be shocked if the committee doesn't drop them and move up Texas A&M. Now with some of the losses these other teams have taken, teams that were previously too high in the AP are starting to make sense in those positions. I'm talking about teams like Notre Dame and Texas and Oklahoma. Personally, I don't see Texas and Oklahoma finishing in those positions by season's end, but Notre Dame is definitely likely to stay in the top 12. I would say around at least 9, if not higher, depending on some of the wins and losses these other teams take going down the stretch. Now here is my top 10 compared to the committee. Of course, I have Ohio State number 1. They're the best team in the country. Some people may want to argue that my number 2 team, Texas A&M, is number 1. And you know what? I actually don't have an issue with you making that argument, right? You're probably an SEC homer and you think the SEC is the best conference in the country, so you have your opinion, you have your point of view. So if you would want to make Texas A&M number 1 on your top 10, then go for it. That's all you. I firmly believe Ohio State's the best team in the country, and I firmly believe they would and potentially will beat Texas A&M in a head-to-head matchup. Number 3 is Indiana. I dropped them for barely beating Penn State. The way I describe Indiana, it's like a girl with an unattractive face, but she goes to the gym and she works out and she's fit and she looks the best she can possibly look with what she has to work with. So she's never going to be a 10, right? Because her face just won't let her be a 10. That's what Indiana is. They don't have the roster and the athletes and the talent to be the best team in the country, to be a national champion. But with what they have, they're making the best with it. They're fit, they're in shape, they got a good figure. They just don't have a great face. That's Indiana. Indiana, number 3. Number 4, I have Oregon. That was a tough win in Iowa, period. I had Oregon losing at Iowa. That's how much I believed that was a tough win, because I didn't think they could do it. They proved me wrong. The last drive of the game was some incredible passing plays, especially the one specific deep ball right past the defender that the receiver caught one-handed. Oregon deserves respect, and they get my respect for that win in Iowa. Number 5, I have Alabama. And frankly, my number 6 team, Texas Tech, I could flip-flop those two teams. I don't think Alabama's win at home against LSU was impressive. 20-9. I think Texas Tech could beat LSU worse than that, but I'm going to let Alabama stay at 5, and I'm going to have Texas Tech at 6. Number 7, Ole Miss. They had that tough game against Citadel over the weekend, but they are a one-loss team, so they deserve to be in the top 10 for now. Georgia, number 8. Same reasons. They're a one-loss team, but that might change this weekend. So we'll see what happens there. Georgia Tech at number 9. I put them back in the top 10 because they're the only one-loss team in the ACC. I think right now, so far, they're the best team in the ACC. Obviously, the committee doesn't think so. They didn't have them very high last week. But I think they deserve a little more respect than they're getting as a one-loss team. So number 9, Georgia Tech. And then number 10, for me, the best two-loss team in the country is most likely Notre Dame. And that's right now. One of these other better teams loses in the future. Let's just say Oregon loses to USC, for example. Then Oregon becomes the best two-loss team in the country over Notre Dame, in my opinion. We'll see how it plays out. But here you have it. Here's my top 10 against the AP's top 10. Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? If you're an SEC homer, I don't want to hear it from you. I already know you think the SEC would never lose. The SEC's never lost a hypothetical game ever in history. Everyone knows that. But if you're a fan of the Big Ten or another conference, I'd like to hear your thoughts on my top 10 or what your top 10 would be.
Hey, quick time out here. Please take a moment to just subscribe, comment, and like. If you do all three of those things, you'll really help me out in getting the word out for this show. Help me hopefully gain a larger audience. I would greatly appreciate it. So comment, like, and subscribe, please. And go Bucks.
All right, so now it's time for Legends in Scarlet and Gray. Now, this is something you probably wouldn't expect, but I am giving Jeremiah Smith a shout out as a legend already. He's a current Buckeye, but it's my show and it's my rules. And when you become the fastest receiver in Buckeyes history, make it to 25 touchdown catches, 6 games ahead of the legendary David Boston, you deserve some praise and some respect. And I'm also doing this because I want Buckeye fans to cherish this amazing time that we are in right now. We truly have what will be called some of the greatest Buckeyes of all time on the team, with Jeremiah Smith, calebdowns, Arbel Reese, juliansayin, and more. And we're going to look back at this team and say, damn, we were loaded with that team. And just like we do already with some of our previous legendary teams, this team is definitely on par. Jeremiah Smith is likely to leave Ohio State as the greatest receiver of all time, and it will take someone truly special to eclipse who he is and what he will have done by the time he leaves Ohio State. So Jeremiah Smith, this week's legend in Scarlet and Gray. And finally, it's time for my predictions for week 12. But before we get to those, last week I went 5-1 on my predictions. I was 38-18 prior to that. So now I'm 43-19 overall in my predictions, which is pretty solid if you ask me. So first up, Ohio State will play UCLA at home. Ohio State's a 31.5 point favorite. Don't like it. Wouldn't bet for Ohio State to cover if I were you, because Ryan Day just isn't about it. He isn't about going out there and putting it on other teams like that. He's actually made it very clear he's trying to minimize the reps and snaps that the starters take to prepare for the playoffs. So if you're betting with points, take UCLA. That's the honest truth. But if you're just picking who's going to win this game, clearly it's going to be Ohio State. Ohio State averages 36 points a game to UCLA's 20 points a game. Ohio State gives up 7 points a game, and UCLA gives up 31 points per game. So no brainer, Ohio State to win this one. Next game is number 9 Oregon at 8-1 versus Minnesota. Again, Oregon is a 22.5 point favorite in this game. Oregon is not Ohio State. Oregon will go out there and run up the score if they are getting it going and scoring. I definitely like Oregon to win this game. I don't know if they're going to cover the 22.5 spread, but they do average 39 points per game to Minnesota's 24 points per game, and Oregon only gives up 14 points per game as opposed to Minnesota's 22 points per game. So definitely like Oregon to win this game, and if I were betting one way or another, I would bet Oregon to cover the spread. Next game is number 10 Notre Dame. That's 7-2 at number 24 Pitt, also 7-2. And Notre Dame is a 10.5 point favorite in this game. Now, when you look at the numbers for this game, offensively, Notre Dame averages 39 points per game, and Pitt averages 40 points per game, whereas Notre Dame's defense gives up about 19 points per game, and Pitt gives up about 22 points per game. Now, I will say this. I will pick Notre Dame to go into Pitt and win this game outright. I don't think they'll cover the 10.5. So, again, I don't bet because, teams, they get garbage touchdowns, they get garbage points in games when it doesn't matter, which screws up the point spread. I'm not a point spread betting man, but I would pick Notre Dame to win this game at Pitt. Next game, Oklahoma 7-2 at Alabama 8-1. Alabama's favored by 7. This game is a tough game for me to pick because there's a lot about Alabama against LSU I saw that I didn't like on the offensive side of the ball. The defense played really well, but again, it's hard to measure that against an LSU offense that's been pretty terrible all season with a bad offensive line. Now, Oklahoma does not have a great offense. They do average 29 points per game, and Alabama averages 33 points per game. And Oklahoma only gives up 14 points per game, and Alabama only gives up 17 points per game. But for me, the biggest difference in this game is where the game is played. I remember last year, Alabama went to Oklahoma, and Oklahoma stunned them. Oklahoma was a pretty bad team last year, but they were fired up for that game, and they gave Alabama a surprising loss last year. I do like Alabama to win this game at home. They will be ready for this Oklahoma team. I don't know if I would bet the 7-point spread if I was a betting man, but I do like Alabama to win this game outright. And finally, the last game is 7-2 Texas at 8-1 Georgia. Georgia is a 6.5 point favorite. Offensively, Texas is averaging 30 points per game, and Georgia is averaging 33 points per game. Defensively, Texas is only giving up 16 points per game, and Georgia is giving up 20 points per game. Now, what kind of man would I be if I picked Georgia in this game when I've been saying Georgia is a bad football team? They're not a good football team. Their 8-1 record is not an indication of who they really are. Having said that, I don't love Texas either. I don't think Texas is a great team. Not even close. They have plenty of work they still need to do on offense. They've gotten a little lucky throughout this season to even be 7-2 at this point. Frankly, I'm going to pick Texas to win this game. And the reason is Texas needs this game much worse than Georgia needs this game. Georgia can take a loss. They can lose this game and still make the college football playoffs. If Texas loses, they're out. They're done. So Texas is going to be the more desperate team, and I like Texas to win this game. So I'm picking Texas outright. Doesn't matter what the point spread is because Georgia's favored by 6.5. Give me Texas. So my final picks, I have Ohio State over UCLA. I have Oregon over Minnesota. I have Notre Dame over Pitt. I have Alabama over Oklahoma, and I have Texas over Georgia. That will do it for this week's show. Please comment, like, and subscribe. I am open to conversations, whether they be agreements or debates, unless you're an SEC fan. I don't want to hear your SEC clown stuff. It's clear you can't say anything to an SEC fan. They believe the SEC is the greatest thing since God. So I don't want to hear it from SEC fans. I'm not even going to take my time to bother with you. But other Big Ten fans, other conferences, if you want to debate, I'm here for it. So thank you for listening to the Buckeye Battlecry Show. Listen to me anywhere you find podcasts if you don't have time to watch on YouTube. And until then, bleed scarlet and gray. Go Bucks.